Alrighty, so this is a continuation of the basic melee guide. If you haven't seen that, make sure to go check that out if you are new to the game. I'm going to source some of the information from the official Decaying Winter Trello, which I will leave in the description and as a pinned comment. Anyways, let's get started. Grab a weapon from my locker and press T. Then click on weaponry to see the weapon stats. Let's understand this from top to bottom, starting from lethality. Lethality is the amount of damage the light attacks do from your melee weapon. Ignore the percentage sign after the number. So, that means that this sledgehammer should do 18 damage on a light. You were probably thinking, but wait, you didn't do 18 damage. Well, let me get to that after talking about strike lethality. Strike lethality is the amount of damage a heavy attack will do. Ignore the percentage sign again. As you can see, the sledgehammer does 65 on a heavy. Or does it? So to explain why I did less damage than stated on the weaponry page, was because I was playing Blitzer, which has a 15% melee damage debuff. Buff and debuffs are additive in this game for the most part. So to do some math, if I do 15% less damage, that means you take the base damage of the heavy attack, which is 65 in this case, and multiply it by 0.85, which gives us 55.25 damage. But since this game doesn't like decimals, it gets rounded up to 56. Now this is why eating rations is important, because they can benefit you by granting you melee, defense, and movement speed buffs. If you don't, they can cause debuffs reducing your melee, defense, and even movement speed. You can look at the Trello for the exact numbers in the description, or look at the screenshot on screen right now. To understand this better, I used an Executioner Sword against Scavs. As you can see, the Executioner Sword does 125 base damage on a heavy, but I am thirsty and starving, indicated by the empty red bars on the bottom. So let's do some math again to figure out how much damage I will do. Starting with the base damage of the Executioner Sword's heavy attack, which is 125. Now we add our debuffs together, so being Blitzer reduces our damage by 15%. Since we are hungry, reduces it further by 10%. Finally, we add on another 15% since we are thirsty, making it a 40% melee damage decrease. This means that our original 125 damage heavy attack is now being multiplied by 0.6, which is equal to 75 damage exactly. Now in normal circumstances, I would not one-shot this scav because this pipe scav has 80 HP, but it was damaged beforehand. Now for the next example, my hunger and thirst bar are about half full, so that means I don't have any buff or debuff from being hungry or thirsty. I'll let you guys figure this one out. The last example is where I'm fully satiated, which means my hunger bar is filled, so according to the Trello, I should be doing 20% increased melee damage. If we do some math, then we start with our satiated buff of 20%, then we subtract 15% since I am Blitzer for a total of a 5% increased melee damage buff. Meaning that the equation should be 125 multiplied by 1.05, which should come out to 131.25, which rounds out to 132. If you are not into numbers that much, just understand that doing 100 damage with a melee weapon can one-shot most scavengers, so you should eat and drink your rations if possible. The next stat is weight light swing, which is the speed of which your light attack combo comes out. Take for example this boar spear. As you can see, this boar spear has 25% attributed to its weight light swing, meaning that it has one of the slowest light attack speeds. Now, when we look at the combat knife, it has 100% as its weight light swing, which means it has one of the highest light attack speeds. The percentages mean the same for weight heavy swing, except it's now for heavy attacks. Here is how they look when compared to each other. The next stat is effective range, which is the distance where you can hit an enemy. The higher the percentage, the longer the range. I'll cover more why this is important later. Then finally, there is wounding level, which is directly tied to the specification of the weapon. Let's start with blades and spears. They cause bleed on hit, which is basically the damage over an unspecified amount of seconds that cannot stack. The bleed damage over time depends on the wounding level stat of the weapon. Here are the values according to the Trello if you really want to know. The next category of weapons are bludgeons and axes, which cause fracture on the enemies. Fracture reduces the melee damage of the enemy, which depends on the wounding level stat on the weapon. Here are the values according to the Trello. If you really want to know, feel free to pause and read. Here is an example of how fracture reduces this scav's damage. As you can see, the pipe scav did 6 damage to me without fracture. Now, when I hit him with a sledgehammer, he now hits me for only 1 damage. For weapon rarity, it's just how rare the weapon is defined. No need to look further into that. Now onto kiting, which is another extremely useful skill. The easiest weapons to kite with are weapons with 200% effective range, since you can consistently hit other melee enemies without getting hit. A fun fact in this game is that if you hit most enemies with anything, they will slow down. This also applies to melee weapons. So what does this have to do with anything? Well, since most spears have 200% range, you can light attack and kill most enemies before they can even hit you. So essentially what you can do is wait until the enemy is within your attack range, hold left click, and walk backwards. This usually works on most enemies, but be very cautious on scavs that can parry, since they have a high chance to parry when you are within range, or if they take any source of damage. Although for waves, there are some extra steps, like if an enemy gets too close, you have to turn around and run away to get distance. Then you repeat the process of waiting until the enemy is in the attack distance, holding left click and walking backwards. Usually it's a good idea to parry when you are running away to try and prevent getting backstabbed, because this is what happens when you don't. I also do not recommend kiting with lights on later defense waves, since the time to kill is a lot slower than another method. This other method is kiting with heavy attacks, but usually only with weapons that can one-shot the enemy. Simply put, the enemy can't damage you if they are dead. Usually crafted melee weapons such as the Decimator or Executioner Sword are the most common ones to kite with heavy attacks due to their high heavy attack damage. If you want to practice doing this, I recommend playing Arbiter at first, because of his high health pool, being immune to cripple, and 30% extra melee damage. Also, let's just have a literal 90 damage pocket impact grenade because why not? The only real weakness he has is getting an artery, so make sure you have an aseptic bandage on later waves to prevent it, or have a tourniquet lying around somewhere. Kiting with heavy attacks is a steeper learning curve, since the idea is to be just on the edge of your weapon's attack range when you think the animation will hit the enemy. That means you have to learn the heavy attack speed of your weapon of choice. Take example of this gameplay. As you can see, I only stop running to get into melee range just as the animation of the Executioner Sword finishes. Then, when I kill one of the scavs, I turn around and run away to gain distance. You can parry after every kill, but if done correctly, you probably won't be getting hit. Although, do keep in mind that it is usually better to deal with gun scavs with ranged options, either by shooting them or using an ability to reduce the risk of getting debuffs like broken legs or artery. But if you're Arbiter, you don't worry about broken legs. Once you play the game more, you will know who not to melee. Also, keep in mind to be very wary of scavs that can parry. There are more advanced tips, but I won't be covering them anytime soon, since they are not necessary to learn and require more experience than anything. If you would like to share them, feel free. I'm not stopping you. But for now, I will be working on more basic to intermediate level guides after I take a little break again so I don't burn myself out.